So I'm sure it's not new to anybody that the current GPUs that we have out there are becoming more and more power hungry and more, the cooling that you would need to cool these GPUs, GPU dies, and especially the memory is growing, right? The cold plate from way back in the day, the cold plate, which would contact the memory modules and the GPU dies, have gone from just these passive coolers that you could just put on and the GPU would stay cool to these monstrous things, right? So we got a monster type heatsink, and then we have to have a decent fan shroud. 9 times out of 10, it would be a triple fan cooler. There are dual fans and single fan coolers, but those are all more on the low end side. But as these GPUs are getting bigger and bigger, the cooling requirements are getting bigger and bigger. Right now in front of me is a caliper. This caliper is the average width of a GPU. That's about 55 millimeters or 2.1 inches, 2.2 inches. Basically, a 3-slot design type card, right? So you got the main I/O on the back side or the back plate of the card that slots into your motherboard or your chassis, and that steel bit takes up 2 slots. But then the third slot is really being covered by the actual fan shroud, the GPU shroud itself. We're talking in the future, considering what Andrew talked about earlier and what we know about with the 3090 Ti, being a GPU that can be rated up to 450 watts. These are rumors right now, and we're still waiting for the launch, which, by the way, when is the launch? Anybody know when the launch is? Isn't it? Allegedly. Yeah, so we got 3 days to launch, right? Allegedly. For the 3090 Ti. No, the 3090 Ti. And
no, you got it right.
GPUs,
you got it right.
the rumors have it at 450 watts. Some rumors said 300 watts, but 450 seems right, because if we look back at various tech tubers, they were able to push these cards up to 480, 450 watts easily, right? With certain overclocks, some tuning and stuff like that, they're pushed these cards really far. They're getting at the limits of what those heat sinks are even capable to do. Now we're about to venture into this new power supply requirement with the PCIe 5.0, stuff like that, where we're going to have the 12 pin, the ATX 3.0 standard with the ATX 12 pin or 12 volt VO, which is basically what we've seen on the Founders Edition, right? We got the 12 pin, connector. Those connectors are rated up to 600 watts.
Only? Okay.
What if our GPUs get to that point of where we're doing 500, 550, close to 600 watts? What is the cooling mechanism going to be on those GPUs? Now, I understand as process improvements, the die shrinks and all that good stuff, that might help in mitigating some of that heat. But, if we're already at 55 millimeters and triple slot design, we might have 4 actual PCIe slots being taken up on your case. So there's no room for maybe a NIC, NVMe, a U.2 drive, stuff like that, because the power standard is increasing. PCIe 5.0 is going to be more efficient. It's going to have better bandwidth, more throughput. But the ATX 3.0 standard, while it's simplifying the wiring where we don't need all this crazy wiring anymore, it's going to open a door for these GPU manufacturers to really build these monstrous GPUs that not only need to fit in a standard mid-sized tower case, but needs to have sufficient cooling for the memory modules and the DIMMs. Like, I'm not even sure what HBM3, how the thermals are on that as far as memory. But if we're at GDDR6 and most of our memory modules, gamers, compute workloads, doesn't matter, most of our memory modules, especially in 3000 series, are running really warm, and everybody's having to, replace thermal pads, maybe get better thermal pads, do various mods to it to try to keep those GPUs under control. Can you imagine what's going to happen when the new standard rolls out? These GPUs are taking up more surface area and having to dissipate 500 plus watts of heat.
I think hybrid GPUs might become standard at that wattage. There's just no way you're gonna fit enough cooling in even 4 slots. Yeah, there's just no way. I don't think so. Not you can't. It's already hard enough to dissipate 400 watts in three slots of space, right? I would say, yeah. So I would say like 450 is the limit. As soon as you get up to like 600, I'd say you're gonna have to go hybrid.
Right. Well, with the 3090 Ti at 450 watts, if we calculate that, we get 75 through the PCIe slide, and it looks like dual 8-pin is going to be at the limits. Like you wouldn't be able to run these cards, these newer cards, 4000 series, whatever, at dual 8-pin. Most
Probably
of the
a
high-end
triple.
models are going to have to be triple 8-pin, or they're going to have the 12-pin connector that can, handle the 600 watts. Doesn't mean they're going to run at 600 watts. I'm just saying that that opens the door for these manufacturers to really push the limits of the TDP of these GPUs, as long as they can have sufficient cooling, like liquid cooling. Then those GPUs are definitely going to be power hungry. But I'm looking at a connector right now that has the proprietary NVIDIA connector.
Yeah,
it's
12-pin microfit.
the triple 8-pin that you connect into the 12-pin.
Yeah, the adapter.
Just to provide the juice that you need for the 3090 Ti and stuff like that. So we'll see how things go. But the new ATX 3.0 standard has Sense technology in it. And I really enjoy looking into the actual hardware specifications, the pinouts, what's ground, what's open, the actual boot up power requirements, the maximum sustained power requirements. Eventually, I have a feeling that Gamers Nexus, I have a poster to my right that you can't see, but the Gamers Nexus poster, I have a feeling is going to be the new pinout for in the future for this new ATX 3.0 standard.
So regarding the pinout from NVIDIA, I wonder how they're gonna do it, because if you look at some of those adapters they have, the lower end cards that comes with an adapter, if you look at the pins, are missing. So
I don't think they're missing on the card; they're missing on the cable. Right?
On the cable, yeah, the adapter cable. So they that's smart, because then you can't overpower it on accident or whatever. But so in other words, these adapters aren't universal; they cheaped out. So you better make sure you have the right adapter, otherwise the computer's not going to turn on. I was going to say one thing about the new ATX standard you're talking about, Vega, is I think they're also getting rid of all the under 12 volt power rails and putting them right on the motherboard, right? Yeah, conversions happening right on the motherboard. So like now, idle state on a full desktop is like what, 10 watts? Some really low.
Yeah. It makes the overall system much more efficient for sure. I'm super interested to see. We've seen Asus come out with the new power standard. We've seen Gigabyte and Asus come out with the new motherboard with the new power standard. So we've seen depictions of it, but to actually roll something out like that, I have a feeling it would be more on the OEM side, like Dell and stuff like that, before it becomes mainstream for the average consumer at home and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's I don't know, man. I think those bigger cards that have the 600 or close to anything above 450, in my opinion, is probably only going to come as a hybrid. I think that's what's going to happen.
Well, you also need to think that, that's the spec of the cable and the connector, but they want to leave some headroom. So like if you get a 450 watt TDP card, but it has a power limit that you can set in Afterburner to like 110 to take it up to 5, you're still under that threshold. So, it's the potential power. It's not necessarily that the cards that are going to come out are going to pull 600 watts. And also, I think they kind of have a good sense of the rate that technology is advancing, and they want to make a connector that they don't have to make a new one in another 2 years.
Yeah.
Right.
So PCI Express 6-pin and then 8-pin has been around for a pretty long time now. Basically since PCI Express
ATX.
Gen 1, there was the 6-pin connector. So I mean, I think we've been due for a new connector, given that three 8-pins on a GPU isn't necessarily like an unusual thing at this point for high-end cards.
Mhm.
So 3 of any connector seems like just too much. So if we can get that down to 1 and make that one connector just be universal, give or take, then I feel like that's just the way to go, because it's going to reduce cost in production of, making only one connector, and also just across the lineup of GPUs, no matter who's making them.
Yeah, I mean, like you might have a Seasonic power supply that's rated for 1600 watts, and it has like freaking 12 6+2 pins on the power supply. Instead of having that, you could have 3 12 pins, right?
Yeah.
So you're reducing the amount of wires. So the benefit on that is, if you're a person that has OCD like me, when you do the cable management, there's less cables to manage now, right? And you're still getting the adequate power for your GPU or whatever it may be. You have plenty of headroom, and yeah, the 600 watts isn't what I foresee the GPUs running at, but it does open the door for 515, 550, 525, because you always want that headroom. That's why you always get a power supply that's rated at least 30 to 40% above where your system is going to be normally running at. You usually can see the peak efficiency, but I didn't mean to interrupt you, Shinji.
Oh no, I'm agreeing with you. Yeah, I'm agreeing with you. Go ahead.
Yeah, so just the sense technology that's built into these 12 pins. The good thing about that, kind of aligning with what Andrew's saying, is these power supplies will have the 12 pin connectors, maybe 2, maybe 3, maybe just 1, depending on the range, or model you get, 450 all the way up to 1,000+ watts. They'll have the pin out, but because the sense technology, it will be able to detect, okay, this is only a card that's on 150 watts. We don't need to give it that much juice. We can use, pins 2, 3, 6, and 5. Or this is a very power hungry card. We can use pins, 1, 3, 4, 5, 6,
1 through 12.
8, whatever. Yeah, it can detect and provide the power from the board directly. What it needs, because that, from my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, I could be wrong about this, gentlemen. These new power supply standards are going to connect to the motherboard, but then there's going to be another cable in which you connect to the motherboard that will go to your GPU, CPU, whatever it may be.
Oh yeah, so correct me if I'm wrong. I could be wrong, guys, but from what I remember, the new standard is going to be whatever your power in AC and what's going to come out of the power supply directly will be 12-volt rails only. And then that also 12-volt rail new motherboard connector or something similar is going to go to the motherboard. And any conversion for like an SSD, 2.5-inch SSD that takes 5 volts, stuff like that, will be done on the motherboard, and those will be coming out of the motherboard. So that's my understanding of how that's going to work, because we technically don't have any yet. So
no,
I think Linus had like a prototype.
No, actually, I do think either Dell or HP has made a couple computers that conform to the standard.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, that it's just becoming the standard, so it will take a little while before everything moves to that. But in terms of like the power supplies, yeah, I think we'll be able to see much more efficient power supplies, smaller power supplies, because the lower voltage stuff that we do somewhat still rely on, it just doesn't need to be an added cost for the power supply. It makes much more sense to have it on board, because typically the power drop from those lower voltage devices is fairly low.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about like 2.5-inch drives, maybe 3.5-inch drives, stuff like that would still use low voltage 3.3 5-volt rails. But yeah, if the only cables coming out of the power supply are 12 volt to the motherboard and then a GPU cable, that would be amazing. And
that would simplify so much.
Oh, dude.
Yeah,
I would love it.
In terms of like GPUs using 600 watts and what that's going to mean for the computer itself, yeah, I don't really know in terms of like the heat output, what that means, because like you were saying, yeah, you would need a massive cooler. Like, let's assume a 300 watt GPU that exists today you just double that. The cooler essentially needs to be twice as big as a 300 watt cooler. So like, let's say a 3080 uses 320 watts. You need two 3080 coolers. And we're already seeing basically for good coolers on a card of that class, you're looking at triple slot. So, but it's not even about like, how well the cooler dissipates the heat, but also how well you can get that heat out of the case. Computer chassis have been pretty much the same form for, you know, decades. We're now starting to see more recently like airflow front panels because of necessity.
Yeah.
Gamer snatches.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, in like server environments, they can cram some pretty crazy stuff into like 1 or 2 U chassis.
That's because they have
but
fans
that's
that
reliant on like 20,000 RPM fans.
Yeah,
but we might be looking at stuff that is more of like a blower style, maybe not necessarily blower style, but at least aiming to get the heat out of the expansion slot area versus dumping it into the case and up.
You want to know what my prediction is going to be?
What's that?
What do you got?
So do you guys know? So you guys know about the Supremex leak, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Supremex, although I did do a video on that, you guys can go see it. They use the same cooler from the 3070 up. Okay. The cooler is the biggest cooler I've ever seen in any card. It's thick and it's long. I think it's actually like 310 or something millimeters long. It's big.
That's what she said.
Ha!
Sorry.
That is true.
PG-13.
Well, that's not what she said to me. Probably you.
Like the IO shield on that card is the one with the triple. Like it has 3 actual slots that it takes up just for this IO shield.
Yeah.
So to give it that
sticks
extra.
past it.
Yeah, and then
Like 2
obviously
inches
it's
taller
one
than
more.
it too.
So I think this is going to be become more standard, basically running off of my topic and what you're talking about. 3.5 to 4 slots is going to become the standard high-end GPU, which is going to take up more room in your case, leaving you less, because you got to think the next PCIe slot down is right at that 4. So you won't be able to stick a second card, not unless they're both blower style. There's not going to be much airflow, but yeah, beast of a GPU.
Yeah, and I was going to say, so it's either going to be that, or it's going to be like a blower style card, but the blower fan is only going to be for the MOSFETs and memory. And then the cooler for the GPU core is going to be tubes coming off to a 240 AIO. I think that might be a standard. I think AIOs are so cheap now.
Andrew, wouldn't you agree with that?
I mean, I think even at that, even if there are 600 watt cards, we're gonna see that at like the very, very high end of consumer grade hardware. That's not gonna be the norm as far as I'm concerned. I think most people are gonna be getting more efficient cards that are. I mean, if they're gonna make a 600 watt card, it's going to cost a fortune. Is going to be for the people that I don't know, that are those crazy folks that would even consider 3090 SLI.
Oh my god, those idiots.
Yeah, but
I don't know any of them.
But I think most mainstream cards, you see it like down the line, efficiency goes up in terms of both processing power as well as power consumption. And I think that's where most people are going to focus their computer around. So in terms of actually getting the heat out of the case or cooling these cards in general, I think at that wattage, you're probably best to get like an AIO style cooler like we see on the hybrid cards from EVGA, just because it takes that heat and essentially puts it somewhere else, not right on the card. It's taking it away from the card through water cooling. I do think like it would be cool to see, we've seen like, I guess mostly small form factor, but we've seen some cases where the case itself is like a heat sink. and it uses heat pipes to dissipate that heat to like the side panels and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a great use of space and cooling, and just with 600 watts, you're gonna need all the help you can get. So, yeah, honestly, I feel bad for the PCI slots that these things are going to be in, but
They're gonna have to be made out of adamantium.
that's the thing. Like that, all the PCI Express slots are going to need to be reinforced.
Yeah.
Like actually reinforced, not with
That's
like
what
a
I was gonna
foil.
say. I was gonna say that too, reinforcement, because these cards are gonna be so heavy that between the I/O and that slot be reinforced to hold that GPU, that beefy cooler up, is definitely gonna be something that all motherboard manufacturers should implement in their design.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, if you think about cards being like 4-slot coolers, it really limits the person who can buy it, because like you said, they can't be someone who also wants these other expansion cards potentially. It basically wipes out the small form factor market. I don't know. Maybe we'll be looking at external GPUs as like a new thing where they can sell it all in one enclosure.
No, thank you.
And have hear me out. Like if there's an I/O shield on the back of your computer that goes in the PCI Express slot, and it's just essentially a riser card, but you can transfer that data. Thunderbolt can do 40 gigabits per second, so the next iteration of that might be able to do even more. And
I think it's 80 gigabits per second, to be honest.
Is it
the
80
next
on Thunderbolt
iteration.
4 now? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's still
So,
what? That's still 25% roughly of what PCI Express full 16X can do, though. So
Right, but if you look at a Thunderbolt using a USB-C connector, why not just use 4 different cables for each of the, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if you're bridging an eGPU to a PCI Express slot via 4 Thunderbolt cables, you're basically at potential there. Obviously, you still need to keep the runs short, and that's just the nature of high bandwidth data. But that's a possibility where they could sell a GPU as like a full package, and they have eGPUs already. So that I think Gigabyte has sold them as like a card in an enclosure ready to go. So
Right.
yeah, I don't know, man. I think part of it's going to be what we see in the next generation before cards really start pushing that power boundary in terms of what people are buying. That's going to dictate what the manufacturers make in the next generation.
yeah, for sure.